The call that would rewrite everything Detective Samantha Pierce thought she knew about the Megan Stone disappearance came through the dispatch radio at exactly 11:42 a.m. on a crystal-clear Tuesday morning in September 2024. Pierce was reviewing witness statements from a domestic violence case when the crackling voice of dispatch operator Janet Williams broke through the routine background noise of the Boulder County Sheriff's Department. Detective Pierce, we have hikers reporting human remains discovered near the Arapaho Glacier. Park Service is requesting immediate response for potential crime scene preservation. After 33 years working in Colorado's high country, Pierce had responded to dozens of similar calls. The Rocky Mountains claim lives regularly through avalanches, falls, exposure, and 100 other ways that a wilderness could kill the unprepared or unlucky. But something in Williams' voice suggested this discovery was different. The location itself was significant. Arapaho Glacier had been retreating rapidly due to climate change, exposing terrain that had been locked under ice for decades. Welcome to Cold Case Reals, where we uncover the extraordinary stories hidden behind America's most challenging mysteries. Before we dive into this incredible tale of a vanished climber and the shocking truth that emerged from melting ice after more than 3 decades, tell us in the comments what state you're watching from today. And if you believe that justice can prevail even when it takes decades to surface, hit that subscribe button and join our community of truth seekers who never give up hope. Pierce drove the winding mountain roads to the Arapaho Glacier access point with the windows down, breathing in the thin air that always reminded her why she had never left Colorado despite job offers from urban departments that promised better pay and easier cases. At 8,400 feet elevation, every breath required conscious effort, but the clarity of thought that came with altitude had helped her solve cases that had stumped investigators working at sea level. The hiking trail to the glacier discovery site covered 3 miles of challenging terrain that would test even experienced outdoors enthusiasts. Pierce had been making similar climbs for most of her adult life. First as a search and rescue volunteer during college, and later as a law enforcement officer specializing in wilderness crimes. The granite peaks surrounding her had witnessed human tragedy for thousands of years, but they had also preserved evidence in ways that urban environments never could. Dr. Jennifer Walsh from the University of Colorado's Department of Anthropology was already on scene when Pierce arrived, carefully photographing skeletal remains that the retreating glacier had exposed after decades of concealment. Walsh had been studying climate change impacts on archaeological sites throughout the Colorado Rockies, but this discovery represented her first involvement in a potential criminal investigation. The remains are definitely human, Walsh explained as Pierce approached the exposed rocky area where bones lay scattered across approximately 20 square feet. Based on the state of preservation and the clothing fragments, I'd estimate they've been here for at least 20 to 30 years. The cold temperatures and ice coverage created ideal conditions for preservation. Pierce knelt beside the remains, noting details that her training had taught her to recognize. The bones were arranged in a pattern suggesting the body had been placed deliberately rather than falling naturally. Fragments of outdoor clothing clung to some of the skeletal remains. Pieces of what appeared to be a high-quality climbing jacket in faded blue and black colors, and remnants of hiking boots that looked expensive even after decades of exposure. Any identification? Pierce asked, though she suspected the answer based on Walsh's expression. Nothing obvious, but we did find this. Walsh held up a clear evidence bag containing a tarnished metal object. It's a climbing harness buckle with some kind of engraving. Looks like initials, but they're pretty corroded. Pierce examined the buckle through the plastic, making out what appeared to be the letters MS carved into the metal. Her mind immediately went to the cold case files that she reviewed periodically, wondering if this discovery might finally provide answers to one of Boulder County's most persistent unsolved mysteries. Megan Stone had vanished on October 15, 1991. While attempting a solo climb of Long's Peak, one of Colorado's most challenging 14ers. At 26 years old, Stone had been an experienced mountaineer with successful ascents throughout the Colorado Rockies, the Sierra Nevada, and the Cascade Range. Her disappearance had triggered one of the most extensive search and rescue operations in Colorado history, involving more than 200 volunteers and lasting for 3 weeks. Pierce had been a rookie deputy in 1991, assigned to crowd control and witness interviews during the Stone search operation. She remembered the case vividly. A confident young woman who had planned a multi-day solo climbing expedition, equipped with state-of-the-art gear and enough experience to handle the technical challenges of high-altitude climbing. Stone had been expected to return on October 18th, but when she failed to check in with her roommate as planned, the search began immediately. The original investigation had been handled by Detective Raymond Morrison, a veteran investigator who had worked wilderness disappearances throughout his 28-year career. Morrison's case files, which Pierce had inherited when she took over the Cold Case Division in 2018, painted a picture of a methodical search that had covered hundreds of square miles of challenging mountain terrain without finding any trace of Stone or her equipment. The mystery had deepened when Stone's vehicle, a red 1989 Toyota pickup truck, was found parked at the Longs Peak trailhead, exactly where she had planned to begin her climb. Her camping gear, food supplies, and backup equipment remained in the truck, but her climbing gear and personal items had apparently been taken on the mountain. Search teams have followed every established route up Longs Peak, examined every ledge and crevice where a climber might fall or seek shelter, and found no evidence of Stone's presence. The discovery at Arapaho Glacier, more than 15 miles from Longs Peak, suggested that something had gone wrong with the original search assumptions. Either Stone had changed her climbing plans without telling anyone, or something had happened that had transported her from her intended route to a completely different location. Pierce's first priority was confirming whether these remains actually belonged to Megan Stone, and if so, determining how and why she had ended up so far from her planned climbing area. The forensic examination of the skeletal remains began immediately, with samples taken for DNA analysis and detailed measurements recorded for comparison with Stone's medical records. The University of Colorado's forensic anthropology department had developed sophisticated techniques for extracting information from remains that had been exposed to extreme mountain conditions, and Dr. Walsh was optimistic about obtaining definitive identification. While waiting for laboratory results, Pierce began reviewing the original Stone case files with fresh perspective informed by the glacier discovery. The 1991 investigation had focused entirely on Longs Peak and the surrounding area, operating under the assumption that Stone had encountered problems during her planned solo climb. Search teams had covered the standard climbing routes multiple times, checked known danger areas where climbers frequently encountered difficulties, and interviewed other mountaineers who had been in the area during the same time period. The case files revealed several interesting details that had been overlooked or minimized during the original investigation. Multiple witnesses had reported seeing Stone in Estes Park on October 14th, the day before her planned departure, but their accounts of her demeanor and activities were inconsistent. Some describe her as excited and well-prepared for her climb, while others remember her seeming anxious or distracted about something she wouldn't discuss. More significantly, Pierce discovered that the original investigation had not thoroughly explored Stone's personal relationships and potential conflicts that might have motivated someone to harm her. The 1991 case files contained only cursory interviews with Stone's family members, climbing partners, and romantic interests. Detective Morrison had apparently been convinced from the beginning that Stone's disappearance represented a climbing accident rather than foul play. Pierce's reinvestigation revealed a more complex picture of Stone's life in the months leading up to her disappearance. Stone had been working as a freelance outdoor guide and climbing instructor, leading clients on day hikes and multi-day backpacking trips throughout the Colorado wilderness. Her client list included both experienced outdoors enthusiasts and beginners who were just learning mountaineering skills. Several of Stone's climbing students and guiding clients describe her as competent and safety conscious, but some mentioned that she had seemed troubled by something during the weeks before her disappearance. Stone had apparently been involved in some kind of conflict with another local guide, though the details of their disagreement were unclear from the witness statements collected in 1991. The DNA analysis results arrived on October 3rd, 2024, confirming that the remains discovered at Arapaho Glacier belonged to Megan Stone. The positive identification solved one mystery while creating several new ones. How had Stone traveled from Long's Peak to a location more than 15 miles away? Why had the extensive search operation failed to find any trace of her presence in the area where her body was ultimately discovered? Most importantly, what had caused her death in a location that was not part of her planned climbing route? Dr. Walsh's detailed examination of the skeletal remains revealed evidence that fundamentally changed the nature of the investigation. Stone had died from blunt force trauma to the skull, specifically a series of impact injuries that were inconsistent with a climbing fall or other accidental cause. The pattern and location of the skull fractures suggested that Stone had been struck repeatedly with a heavy object, possibly a rock or climbing tool. The forensic evidence indicated that Stone's death had been a result of homicide rather than a climbing accident. This revelation transformed the case from a decades-old missing person investigation into a murder case that had remained unsolved for 33 years. Pierce found herself investigating not just Stone's disappearance, but also the question of what killed her and why her body had been transported to such a remote location. The crime scene analysis revealed additional evidence that supported the homicide theory. Stone's remains had been found in an area that was not accessible to casual hikers, requiring technical climbing skills and specialized equipment to reach. The deliberate placement of her body suggested that the perpetrator had been familiar with the terrain and had specifically chose a location where the remains were unlikely to be discovered. More disturbing was the evidence suggesting that Stone had been killed elsewhere and transported to the glacier burial site. The arrangement of the bones and the absence of certain skeletal elements indicated that the body had been moved after death, possibly in multiple trips due to the challenging terrain and the weight limitations of mountain travel. Pierce's investigation into Stone's personal and professional relationships revealed several potential suspects who had the mountaineering skills necessary to transport a body to such a remote location. The outdoor guiding community in Colorado during the early 1990s had been relatively small, with most of the experienced guides knowing each other and often competing for the same clients and job opportunities. The conflict that Stone had been involved in during the weeks before her disappearance centered around accusations of unsafe practices and client endangerment. Stone had apparently filed complaints with local outdoor recreation authorities about Gregory Wilson, a veteran guide who operated a mountaineering school and guided service base in Boulder. Wilson had been leading climbing expeditions in Colorado for more than 15 years and had developed a reputation as someone who pushed clients hard and sometimes took unnecessary risks. According to witness statements that Pierce collected during her reinvestigation, Stone had encountered Wilson during a guided climb in September 1991, approximately 1 month before her disappearance. Stone had been leading her own client group on a different route when she witnessed Wilson encouraging inexperienced climbers to attempt technical sections that were beyond their skill level. The incident had resulted in a public confrontation between Stone and Wilson at a popular climbing area, with multiple witnesses observing their heated argument about safety protocols and professional responsibilities. Stone had apparently accused Wilson of endangering his clients for the sake of maintaining his schedule and maximizing his profits. Wilson had responded angrily, making threats about Stone's future prospects in the Colorado guiding community. The confrontation had escalated when Stone followed through on her threats to report Wilson to the Colorado Mountain Club and other organizations that certified climbing guides. Her formal complaints had accused Wilson of violating safety protocols, misrepresenting his qualifications to clients, and creating dangerous situations through poor judgment and inadequate preparation. Wilson's response to Stone's complaints had been swift and aggressive. He had contacted several of Stone's clients and potential employers, spreading rumors about her competence and reliability. Several witnesses reported that Wilson had made statements about Stone getting what she deserved, and needing to learn her place in the local outdoor community. The professional sabotage campaign had been effective in damaging Stone's reputation and reducing her client base during the weeks leading up to her disappearance. Stone had confided to several friends that Wilson's actions were threatening her livelihood and forcing her to consider leaving Colorado to find work in other climbing areas. Pierce's investigation revealed that Wilson had been questioned briefly during the original 1991 search operation, but only as part of the routine canvassing of local guides who might have seen Stone in the mountains. Detective Morrison's notes indicated that Wilson had been cooperative and had provided an alibi for the time period when Stone was believed to have been on Long's Peak. However, Pierce discovered that Wilson's alibi had never been thoroughly verified. He claimed to have been leading a multi-day backpacking trip with clients during October 15 to 18, 1991. But the original investigation had not contacted all the clients to confirm his presence throughout the entire period. More significantly, Wilson's backpacking route would have taken his group through areas relatively close to where Stone's remains were ultimately discovered. The reinvestigation of Wilson's background revealed a pattern of conflicts with other guides and outdoor recreation professionals throughout his career. Wilson had been involved in several disputes over territory, clients, and business practices, and had developed a reputation for aggressive responses to any perceived challenges to his authority or success. More concerning were the incidents of violence that had occurred during Wilson's guided expeditions. Pierce found records of at least 3 occasions when Wilson had been accused of physically assaulting clients or other guides during mountain trips. The remote locations and the physical demands of wilderness travel had made it difficult for victims to report these incidents immediately, and the outdoor community's tendency to handle dispute informally had prevented most cases from reaching law enforcement attention. The investigation took on new urgency when Pierce discovered that Gregory Wilson was still alive and living in Colorado Springs, where he continued to operate as a climbing guide and mountaineering instructor for more than 3 decades after Stone's disappearance. At 68 years old, Wilson was still physically active and continued to lead climbing expeditions throughout the Colorado Rockies. Pierce arranged for surveillance of Wilson while she built a case against him, understanding that the evidence from the 1990s would need to be supplemented with additional proof to support murder charges. The DNA analysis of Stone's remains had revealed trace amounts of foreign genetic material that might belong to her killer, but the degradation caused by decades of exposure to mountain conditions had made it difficult to obtain a complete profile. The breakthrough came when Pierce obtained a court order to collect DNA samples from Wilson for comparison with the evidence recovered from Stone's remains. The legal process required demonstrating probable cause for the search, which Pierce accomplished by presenting the pattern of conflicts between Wilson and Stone, his presence in the area during the time of her disappearance, and the evidence of his history of violence toward other guides and clients. Wilson's DNA profile, when compared to the trace genetic material found on Stone's remains, provided a partial match that was consistent with physical contact between the 2 individuals. While not definitive enough for prosecution by itself, the DNA evidence corroborated the circumstantial case that Pierce had been building against Wilson. The forensic evidence was strengthened by the discovery of additional physical proof during a search of Wilson's property in Colorado Springs. Hidden in a storage shed behind his house, investigators found climbing equipment that had belonged to Megan Stone, including her distinctive ice axe with her initials carved into the handle and her climbing harness system with custom modifications that matched descriptions provided by her climbing partners. Wilson had apparently kept Stone's equipment as trophies for more than 30 years, storing them in a location where they were unlikely to be discovered by casual visitors to his property. The presence of Stone's personal climbing gear in Wilson's possession provided crucial physical evidence, linking him directly to her disappearance and death. Confronted with the DNA evidence and the discovery of Stone's equipment at his property, Wilson initially maintained his innocence and claimed that he had purchased the climbing gear from a second-hand equipment dealer sometime in the 1990s. However, as Pierce presented the full scope of the evidence against him, including witness statements about his conflicts with Stone and his presence in the area during her disappearance, Wilson's story began to change. The confession came during Wilson's 3rd interview with Pierce, conducted in the presence of his attorney, at the Boulder County Sheriff's Department on November 8, 2024. Wilson, now faced with overwhelming evidence of his guilt and the prospect of spending his remaining years in prison, provided a detailed account of the events that had led to Stone's death 33 years earlier. According to Wilson's confession, the confrontation with Stone had begun as an accidental encounter on the morning of October 15th, 1991. Wilson had been leading his backpacking group on a trail that passed near Stone's planned climbing route when he spotted her preparing for her solo ascent of Long's Peak. The sight of Stone, who had been responsible for damaging his reputation and costing him clients, had triggered a rage that Wilson claimed he had been suppressing for weeks. Wilson had approached Stone under the pretense of offering assistance or advice about climbing conditions, but the conversation had quickly escalated into an argument about their ongoing professional conflict. Stone had apparently told Wilson that she intended to file additional complaints about his business practices and would continue working to have his guiding certifications revoked. The argument had moved away from Stone's original climbing route as Wilson had pressured her to accompany him to a more secluded area where they could settle their differences without being overheard by other climbers or hikers. Stone had initially resisted, but Wilson had used his larger physical size and intimidating manner to force her to comply with his demands. The assault had occurred in a remote canyon approximately 2 miles from Stone's intended climbing area. Wilson had struck Stone repeatedly with a rock, inflicting the skull fractures that had caused her death. The attack had been brutal and sustained, indicating a level of rage and premeditation that went far beyond a momentary loss of control. After killing Stone, Wilson had faced the challenge of disposing of her body in a way that would prevent discovery and avoid connecting him to her disappearance. His familiarity with the Colorado wilderness and his experience leading clients through challenging terrain had provided him with knowledge of remote locations where a body might remain hidden indefinitely. Wilson had spent 2 days transporting Stone's remains to the area near Arapaho Glacier, making multiple trips to carry her body and equipment through difficult mountain terrain. The location had been chosen specifically because it was far from established hiking trails, required technical climbing skills to access, and was covered by permanent ice that Wilson believed would prevent the remains from ever being discovered. The elaborate disposal process had required Wilson to abandon his clients during portions of their scheduled backpacking trip, leaving them at a base camp while he claimed to be scouting routes or gathering supplies. His clients had apparently accepted these explanations without question, trusting Wilson's expertise and assuming that temporary separations were normal parts of wilderness expeditions. Wilson had returned Stone's vehicle to the Long's Peak trailhead parking area to support the theory that she had been climbing alone when she disappeared. He had also taken steps to eliminate evidence of their confrontation, including disposing of his own clothing and equipment that might have contained traces of Stone's blood or DNA. The confession provided answers to the questions that had puzzled investigators for more than 3 decades, explaining why Stone's body had been found so far from her intended climbing route and why the extensive search operation had failed to locate any trace of her presence. Wilson's systematic effort to conceal his crime had been successful for 33 years, defeated only by climate change and the retreating glacier that had finally exposed Stone's remains. The psychological evaluation that was conducted as part of Wilson's prosecution revealed a complex personality disorder that had enabled him to continue functioning as a climbing guide and community member while harboring the secret of his crime for decades. Wilson had apparently compartmentalized a murder, treating it as a solved problem that no longer required his attention or concern. The evaluation also revealed that Wilson had continued to experience conflicts with other guides and clients throughout his career, suggesting that his violent response to Stone's challenges had been part of a broader pattern of aggressive behavior that he had managed to control in most situations, but had been unable to suppress when confronted with threats to his professional status and income. Wilson's arrest on November 15th, 2024, sent shockwaves through Colorado's outdoor recreation community, where he had been a respected figure for more than 4 decades. Many guides and climbers who had known Wilson personally struggled to reconcile their memories of him as a competent professional with the revelation that he had been living with the secret of Stone's murder for 33 years. The case had broader implications for the outdoor guiding industry, highlighting the challenges of regulating and monitoring guides who operate in remote wilderness areas with minimal oversight. Stone's attempt to report Wilson's unsafe practices had been intended to protect future clients, but the informal nature of the outdoor recreation community had prevented her complaints from receiving adequate attention or follow-up. The trial preparation revealed the extent to which Wilson's crime had affected not only Stone and her family, but also the broader community of climbers and outdoor enthusiasts who had been touched by her disappearance. The 3-week search operation in 1991 had involved hundreds of volunteers who had dedicated an enormous amount of time and energy to looking for Stone in locations where Wilson knew she would never be found. The emotional toll on Stone's family had been devastating and long-lasting. Her parents, Robert and Linda Stone, had both died in the 2010s without ever learning what had happened to their daughter. Her younger brother, Michael, who had participated in the original search operation as a college student, had spent more than 3 decades wondering whether his sister might still be alive somewhere, unable to contact her family for unknown reasons. Michael Stone's reaction to Wilson's arrest and confession was a complex mixture of relief, grief, and anger that reflected the complicated emotions associated with finally receiving answers to questions that had haunted him for most of his adult life. The knowledge that Megan had been murdered by someone she knew, and that her killer had been living openly in the community for decades, created new sources of pain even as it provided closure to the mystery of her disappearance. The legal proceedings against Gregory Wilson moved forward rapidly once his confession had been recorded and verified. The evidence against him was overwhelming, including his DNA on Stone's remains, her climbing equipment found in his property, witness statements about their conflicts, and his own detailed admission of guilt. Wilson's defense attorney negotiated a plea agreement that avoided the death penalty in exchange for Wilson's cooperation in providing additional details about the crime and accepting a sentence of life imprisonment without possibility of parole. The agreement also required Wilson to provide information about any other crimes he might have committed during his career as a climbing guide. The investigation into Wilson's background revealed at least 2 other incidents that might have involved criminal behavior, including the disappearance of a solo hiker in 1997 and the suspicious death of a climbing client in 2003. However, the evidence in these cases was insufficient to support additional criminal charges, and Wilson denied involvement in any crimes other than Stone's murder. The sentencing hearing, held on February 14, 2025, provided an opportunity for the outdoor recreation community to process the impact of Wilson's crimes and to honor Stone's memory. Representatives from climbing organizations throughout Colorado spoke about Stone's contributions to mountaineering safety and her efforts to improve standards within the guiding industry. Michael Stone delivered a victim impact statement that described the decades of uncertainty and grief that his family had experienced, and has struggled to understand how Wilson had been able to maintain a facade of respectability while knowing what he had done to Megan. Michael's statement also emphasized his sister's love of the mountains and her commitment to helping others experience the wilderness safely and responsibly. Detective Pierce's investigation had taken more than 8 months to complete, consuming significant resources and requiring coordination with multiple agencies and specialists. The successful resolution of the case demonstrated the importance of applying modern forensic techniques to cold cases and the value of persistent investigation, even when crimes have remained unsolved for decades. The case also highlighted the role that climate change had played in exposing evidence that might otherwise have remained hidden indefinitely. The retreating Arapaho Glacier had revealed Stone's remains only because decades of warming temperatures had melted ice that had concealed the burial site since 1991. Without this environmental change, Wilson's crime might never have been discovered. The forensic techniques that had made solving the case possible included advanced DNA analysis methods that could extract genetic material from severely degraded samples, improved methods for dating skeletal remains, and sophisticated crime scene reconstruction techniques that could interpret evidence that had been exposed to extreme environmental conditions for decades. The success of Stone's case encouraged law enforcement agencies throughout Colorado to re-examine other missing person cases from the 1980s and 1990s, particularly those involving experienced outdoor enthusiasts whose disappearances had been attributed to climbing or hiking accidents. The possibility that other victims of violence might be discovered as glaciers continued to retreat prompted the establishment of protocols for investigating human remains found in previously ice-covered areas. The broader implications of the case extended to discussions about safety and accountability within the outdoor recreation industry. Stone's murder had been preceded by complaints about Wilson's business practices that had not received adequate attention from regulatory authorities or professional organizations. Her death might have been prevented if more effective mechanisms had existed for investigating and addressing reports of unsafe or unethical behavior by guides and instructors. Educational programs were developed to teach outdoor enthusiasts about recognizing and reporting inappropriate behavior by guides, and professional organizations implemented new standards for investigating complaints about their members. These changes were implemented in Megan Stone's name, ensuring that her legacy would include improvements to the safety systems that she had been trying to strengthen when she was killed. The memorial service for Megan Stone, held on the 34th anniversary of her disappearance, brought together hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by her story. Climbers and hikers from throughout Colorado gathered at the base of Long's Peak, where Stone had originally planned to begin her final climb, to honor her memory and reflect on the impact that her death had had on their community. Detective Pierce attended the memorial service, understanding that her role in solving Stone's case had provided her with a unique responsibility to speak for a victim who could no longer speak for herself. The investigation had consumed more than 8 months of her career and had required her to master forensic techniques and investigative methods that she had never previously used. But it also demonstrated the importance of never giving up on cases that seemed impossible to solve. The case had changed Pierce's understanding of what was possible in cold case investigations, showing her that advances in forensic science and persistent detective work could provide answers to questions that had seemed permanently unanswerable. The combination of environmental factors, scientific progress, and systematic investigation had created the conditions necessary for justice to prevail even after more than 3 decades. The resolution of Megan Stone's case provided hope to other families dealing with long-term missing person situations, demonstrating that the passage of time did not necessarily mean that cases would never be solved. However, it also illustrated the importance of preserving evidence and maintaining detailed records, since the physical proof that had ultimately convicted Wilson might not have been available if the original investigation had been less thorough in documenting the crime scene and collecting witness statements. The story of Stone's disappearance and the 33-year journey to discover the truth about her fate became a testament to the importance of environmental awareness, the power of advancing forensic science, and the dedication of investigators who refused to let unsolved cases be forgotten. For the Colorado outdoor recreation community, the resolution of the case provided not just closure, but also valuable lessons about recognizing and preventing violence within their ranks. As Detective Pierce reflected on the investigation that had defined nearly a year of her career, she understood that solving Stone's case represented both an ending and a beginning. For Michael Stone and the other family members and friends who had waited decades for answers, it provided the closure that allowed them to finally process their grief and honor Megan's memory appropriately. But the case also marked the beginning of new efforts to apply similar investigative techniques to other unsolved disappearances and to improve the systems that were supposed to protect people who ventured into Colorado's wilderness areas. The combination of environmental change, advancing technology, and persistent human dedication had created possibilities for justice that previous generations of investigators could never have imagined. The legacy of Megan Stone's case will continue to influence cold case investigations and wilderness safety programs for years to come, ensuring that her death contributed to preventing similar tragedies and providing answers to other families whose missing loved ones deserve justice. The mountains that had concealed her murder for 33 years had ultimately revealed the truth, demonstrating that even the most carefully hidden crimes could not escape the patient persistence of both natural forces and human determination to seek justice to the victims, who deserve so much better than the fate that had befallen them.